Hello everyone, welcome to another life group. I'm so glad to see all of you gathered together. Before we get into the study for today, I want you to take a couple minutes with your life group and share with the group, is there any time in your life where you were financially cheated? Maybe it was from a business, maybe it was from somebody who was handling your money in one way or another. Has there ever been a time in your life when you have been financially cheated? Discuss that with your group, and we'll get into the teaching. On Sunday, we started the teaching by talking about how there are people who call themselves pastors who cheat God's people out of their money, similar to the teachers of the law in the text that we read from Mark chapter 12 and 13 on Sunday. Before we talk specifically about those teachers of the law and what they were doing, I'd love for you to just discuss as a group why money is such a difficult topic for the church. Obviously, there are the big things. There are the pastors and churches who cheat their people out of money. But even in churches where it's very obvious that the church is not cheating its people out of its money because the pastor lives at the average income level, the church is not flowing with money, why is it still a difficult topic for even small or not very well-resourced churches? Take a couple minutes and discuss that. Again, before we get into the text itself, I want to ask you one more practical question. I don't look at our members' offerings. I could ask our treasurer to print me off a list of all the charitable giving receipts that he gives out to our people at the end of the year, and I could see how much each person is giving. And there's a healthy discussion among pastors about whether a pastor should or should not do that. I just want you to know, as a young pastor, I haven't come to a conclusion on whether I should do this or not, but I think it'd be interesting for you to discuss the benefits on either side. So let me try to lay out the argument, and then you can, as a group, discuss which side of this you think is more healthy. On the one hand, there are those who say you should not look at the offerings. You should understand as a pastor that there are a number of things going on in a person's life that might affect how their offerings are being given, and that much of it isn't maybe your business. Also, that if you were to start looking at their offerings, you would maybe start to judge them as a person and start to like them less or like them more, or feel like they're more valuable to the church or less valuable to the church if you would look at their offerings. On the other side, there are those who would say, as a pastor, you should look at your members' offerings. It's pretty rare where you get a metric to define part of your members, your flock's spiritual growth. You don't really get a metric to measure how many good works they're doing, how many times they've loved their spouse or taken care of their kids, or how faithful they are to paying their taxes. I don't know what the thing is, but you do get a metric when it comes to their money. And while obviously not every person is going to be able to give 10%, you as a pastor can look at that number and say, man, if that's extremely low, or maybe even extremely high, I better know why as a pastor. Because it's my job to be in your life, knowing how to guide you through the things that Satan tempts you to do and the things that God leads you to do. So, those are the two sides of the argument. Which side do you fall on, and why? The text we studied on Sunday was Mark chapter 12, verses 38 through 13, verse 2. And that's not the typical way that text is put together when it comes to preaching it. Very often, it starts with the story of the widow's mite. You would actually start reading the text where it says Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were being taken. And I don't want to incriminate any pastor who preaches the text that way, because that's how the pericope, which is the set of readings that the Christian church, at least at large, uses regularly on every Sunday of the church here. But I think it can very quickly lose the context. And you can see the widow's mite story as a story primarily about generosity, when it is actually a story about how God protects those who give generously to his church. By using the context and understanding what Jesus is saying about the teachers of the law, can you explain how the three parts of the stories fit together? So you have the part with Jesus talking about the teachers of the law, you have the widow's mite, and you have him talking about the destruction of the temple. Can you just outline a thought pattern? Now, you should have got this if you're listening to the sermon, but see if you can do it again and explain it. Often we remember things better when we use our own words to explain them. So to the group, see if you can explain the train of thought of those three sections of the text together. As we got into the story, we talked a little bit about the tithe. Now maybe you remember the tithe was the Old Testament prescription for every person to give 10% of their income. And we know that in the New Testament, because Jesus has fulfilled the law, that we don't have to give 10% of our income. However, we found out it's a good starting point, and it's always blessed when we give, like those Old Testament Christians gave. We know the gospel more vividly than they do. We're better resourced than they are. And God is faithful. God does not change. He loves his children and wants to provide. This would be a chance for you as a group, first of all, to get real with each other. Obviously, I'm not going to know what you say, but I would love if you as a group would talk about how you choose what amount you give in your offerings. Now, of course, be humble about it if you do give quite a bit, but also be honest about it. This is a chance for you as Christians to encourage one another, to pray for one another, and to love each other, and to work with one another to see how you can be more generous with your money, because we know generosity changes lives. So first of all, I want you to share what your practice is for giving. Not necessarily a percentage, but how do we go about deciding how much goes in the offering every month? Then second to that, I want you to talk about the benefits or drawbacks if we would really push our congregation all to tithe, all to give at least 10%. There are some programs out there that churches do where they talk about tithing for 10 weeks. They call it 10 for 10. And we have personally not done that program, partially because we're already doing this campaign, but also because I think there are some drawbacks to doing a program like that, as well as benefits. So share your practice of giving, and second, talk about the benefits or drawbacks of doing a program where we try to push our members to tithe. Take some minutes to talk about that. We found out in the text that the woman gave, expecting that the church was going to have her back. It would have made a lot of sense for those teachers of the law to stop her and say, it's okay, we know you don't have a lot, anyways, this offering is going to you, so we're going to take care of you. But that's obviously not what the teachers of the law did for that widow with her mite. When it comes to the church and how it manages its money, one of the maybe most easily incriminated things is that we don't take care of the poor very well. Now, I'm not talking about Cross of Life necessarily, I'm talking about Christianity in general. I know I've shared this story before, but there was a time I was reading on Twitter about a church in the Minneapolis area that was trying to do some work there, and somebody on Twitter said, you guys spend all your money building buildings and you never actually help the poor like the Bible says. And I was very struck by that. Obviously, it's just a tweet, but I care about that stuff, I guess. But I saw that and I thought, man, how easily could you say that about my church? How easy could you say that about the church down the road, that we don't take care of the poor? I would love as a group for you to talk about, agree or disagree, our church takes care of the poor well. And then, what are some ways where we could improve taking care of the poor so that we aren't devouring widows' houses? Take some minutes and talk about that. As the widow put her mite into the offering plate, we also saw that Jesus didn't do anything about it. Jesus didn't stop her and say, these men are wicked, they're devouring your house, you don't have to give this offering. Jesus still let her give, even though she was giving to a poor cause. I want to discuss two different points for this, and I'll give you a break in between. The first of those is, how does that make you feel? That Jesus is okay with, in fact, encourages you to continue to give, even if it's not a good cause. Take some minutes and talk about that. The second thing I want you to discuss is about homeless people on the side of the road. Should you give to homeless people on the side of the road? Should you support them? Should you give them money or food or whatever they need, knowing that in some cases, those people on the side of the road are going to take your resources and use them for evil things? This is a hotly debated question in Christianity, and I would love for you as a group to discuss that. Talk about, what does God expect of us, and what does God promise through it all? So talk about that. The last portion of the text that we focused on was the first two verses of chapter 13 of Mark, where Jesus talks about the destruction of the temple. The disciples are walking and they say, look at the temple, it's so beautiful. And Jesus says the whole thing's coming down to the ground. In there, he basically lays out for us, look, these buildings are wonderful, yes, but they're not the most important thing. I'm the most important thing. As Jesus would say, destroy this temple and I'll raise it again in 3 days. And he was talking about his body. Jesus' body is the true temple. Any building that we get into or build, it's not the true temple. It's just a means to an end for us to do more ministry. Now that can, on the one hand, hamstring us and say, how important is a building anyways? On the other hand, it can empower us and say, man, imagine how much actual ministry we could do if we had a building of our own to work out of. That's not the question I want you to deal with right now. What I want you to discuss as a group is how in our conversations with each other, how as a congregation, can we make sure that our campaign and the rest of our existence as a congregation is always focused on Jesus, not on facilities or programs or things that aren't the ministry of the gospel? How can we do that? What can we talk about? What things can we try to avoid so that we don't fall into the pitfall of saying this building is most important, or this program is most important, or this thing that's not God's word is most important? Take some minutes and discuss that. Thank you very much for taking time to be in a life group this week. Don't forget, next week is Commitment Sunday. So make sure you have your commitment card ready to hand in, make your commitment to God on Sunday. I'm so excited to see how God is going to bless us as our generosity not only changes our lives, but starts to change the lives of the people around us. God bless you, and I will see you on Sunday.